Hello, everybody. My name is Gareth Russell. I'm at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. I'm an ecologist. I've been using Wolfram products for a long time, a couple of decades. I've been honored with an Innovator award, which I guess is why I'm speaking here. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about using the Wolfram language in ecology, what it does well, what's a little bit funny about it, and how it could possibly do better. Um, So the abstract for my talk, which you've probably read already if you're here, is that I think the Wolfram ecosystem is a fantastic thing for doing ecology, probably the best platform that there is. Um, and yet, I think there are still some issues that need to be overcome before it becomes adopted more widely. So I'm going to talk about those and give a couple of examples of some sort of what I'm calling killer apps that could really get the attention of the ecological community. First, a little bit about me and what I do with the Wolfram language. At the moment, mostly what I do is model animal movements. I gave a talk on this as a Wolfram University speaker earlier this year, perhaps. And this is an example of the kind of data that I work with. These are the tracks of 5 elephants over 2 years with a GPS fix every 15 minutes in Etosha National Park in Namibia. So this map is made in Wolfram. So there's something like 300,000 data points in this map. And what do I do with data like this? Well, we take background imagery and information about the locations of landscape features like fences and waterholes. We fit a statistical model to that. It's a variation on conditional logistic regression, which is a model of choice. What we do is we assume that when an animal makes a movement from one location to the next, that it is choosing where to go. And so we ask, what are the qualities of that location relative to all the other locations it could have picked or could have walked to in the same amount of time? And we end up with a series of functions that describe how animals relate both to features of the landscape, like waterholes, and also because we have 5 elephants tagged to each other. So this just shows, for example, when we just focus on waterholes, which are in the center of these brown circles. I won't go through it in detail, but if you look at the top figure, if you look at part B, dry season, that left-hand column, that is telling you that those 5 elephants don't hang out at the waterholes. They go backwards and forwards towards them. That's what those U-shaped functions mean. In the bottom figure, that shows you how the elephants relate to each other. And the brief summary of that is that some elephants follow other elephants around, some elephants avoid other elephants, and this all has to do with their different age and dominance hierarchy. And we can take the strengths of those interactions, which are in a matrix, and turn that into a social network graph on the right-hand side. All right. So that's a little bit about me. This is the same kind of thing. These are goats. They are tagged every 1 second. So this is about 4 days of goat movement, 16 goats, much more high-resolution data, much more high-resolution landscape. But we do the same kind of thing, and we construct a social network for these goats. And what this bar chart at the bottom really shows you is that some goats are leaders and some goats are followers. So the goats with the high bars are the goats that are influencing other goats, right? So the other goats follow them. They base their movement decisions on where those influencer goats are. And the goats with the low bars are the followers. They just kind of go where everyone else is going. I illustrate this to show you that this is what I'm calling like full stack Wolfram language work. Everything here is done in the Wolfram language, from the data processing, the mapping, custom statistical model building and fitting, and the visualization at the end, making some custom visualizations using graphics primitives. So I think that if you really want to showcase the power of the Wolfram language computational framework, ecology may be the best application area to do it in. However, the problem is this. I'm the only ecologist I know who uses the Wolfram language in this way, the only practicing academic ecologist using all its capabilities. I know some other ecologists who use it, and they are generally mathematical ecologists, and every so often they need to solve some PDEs or something, and they'll jump into the Wolfram language, solve those PDEs, and jump out again. It's very traditional stuff, and they probably could have done it in Mathematica version 2. So they're not really using, the breadth of capabilities that it has right now. And I assume that this is a problem for Wolfram because they've invested in ecology. Recently, the knowledge base had a big expansion of taxonomic and and ecological data, and that must have taken resources to do. But as a professional ecologist, I know why other ecologists would be reluctant to embrace Wolfram technology. So in this presentation, I'm going to be a little bit rude and offer some unsolicited advice. It comes because I'd love to see other ecologists using Wolfram language. So I'm hoping to promote that. And the fundamental challenge is that ecology is so different in practice from, say, physics and mathematics, the disciplines out of which the Wolfram language emerged. So there's a few parts to this. I'm going to try to break it down. The first challenge, I'm not going to say too much about, but it is important in my field and its cost. There's a perception that access to the Wolfram language is limited because it costs a lot of money. And so it's limited to wealthy institutions that have site licenses and things like that. And the problem is that practicing ecologists are not only or even primarily in Western academic institutions, and conservation biologists even more so. They could be people working in the field, working for little nonprofits in developing countries. Even the elephant work and the goat work, those data are from Namibia in collaboration with nonprofits. So for these people, money is scarce or perhaps zero. And this is why competitors, free competitors like R, are overwhelmingly popular in my field. Even when someone like me has the Wolfram language available, they know that their collaborators may or may not. Now, I don't know how to solve this, and I don't really know how Wolfram deals with access in other places in the world, but I do know that it's an issue, at least of perception. I'm not going to say any more about it. Would love to chat to someone about that. Challenge 2 is appealing to the professional community. So even at low costs, ecologists will need a reason to try, right? It needs to offer something that they can't get already, and I think it can, but it needs to be shown in the right way. And the areas I think that are important are curated data access instead of curated data, some killer apps that use the full breadth of capabilities, and you can appeal to the fact that there's professional grade maintenance and documentation and support. And to do all of this, you need to collaborate more closely with the actual, community of practicing ecologists. And let's go through some of these. Okay, curated data access. Okay, so this is the part where I'm going to be a little bit rude. So data in physics and chemistry, right, are easily curated. Masses of elements or planets, the structures of molecules, everyone agrees on what they are. They're precise. And when you get one of those from the Wolfram knowledge base, nobody disagrees that, the mass of the Earth is correct or incorrect. Ecological data are not like that at all. They're messy, they're dynamic. There aren't consensus data in most areas. I'm going to give you some examples. These are generally drawn from the things that are shown in the Wolfram documentation. This is entity type from taxonomic species. This is the type tree for the new taxonomic species entity type. And it produces this graph. And okay, so we have the overall species specification at the top. We have some kingdoms. Next, then we have eukaryotes broken into animal, fungus, and plant. And then animals go down to just 5 vertebrate classes within one phylum. Okay, so if I showed an ecologist that we have taxonomic information and this was what they looked at, they would go, what about the other 40 or so phyla? Where are all the insects and things like that? Let's have a look at an actual set of data for an animal within this framework. We're looking at dugongs. Dugongs are sea cows. They're related to manatees, if you've ever seen one in Florida. Here's everything that's available from this data set. This is all fine. The species is there. Those biomes seem okay. We've got an IUCN classification, vulnerable. That's okay. I'm just going to scoot down a couple of pages of data. We've got some genetic information. That's all fine. Here we have some problems. So here we have a subdivision of subphylum with the same name. That can't be correct. And the big howler is this Sarcopterygi. That is a group of fishes, right? And these are mammals. So there's a big error in that there. So that's going to make someone go, So where are these data coming from, right, in this entity? So the class, right, the thing that is mistakenly, or the taxonomy itself, right, that's coming from the NCBI taxonomy database. And that is surprising. The NCBI is a sequence database first. It has limited taxonomic information that's been brought in from somewhere else. it currently represents, it says on its own website, about 10% of the described species of life on the planet. If you were looking for taxonomy, you would not get it from the NCBI. So looking at all the sources for all the properties here, this is an eclectic and mixed bag of sources, some of which are quite well known and understood. iNaturalist is well known and understood. Then we have something called Waza's Virtual Zoo, something called Amazing Numbers in Biology, the Unified Medical Language System. It's really a weird bunch of sources for species data, and almost none of them are where you would, if you were a professional ecologist, where you would look for those data. I'm going to do one more example here. And again, this comes from the documentation, that we can use the entity framework, right, to, for example, subset species to those that are in Grand Canyon National Park, which is another entity. So this is a cool use of bringing entities together and having them interact. Okay, so we use this entity class, taxonomic species, with observation location, and we get this list, 64 things in the list. It's cool in principle, but if you show this to an ecologist, they go, okay, just 64 species? Let's have a look at what the National Park Service says is in the Grand Canyon. On its front page, it lists 586 species, just looking at birds, mammals, and reptiles, so not including plants, insects, or anything else. So that's a little different from 64. Okay, so to summarize this, right? So this is talking curated data. They're presented in a uniform way, which is good. They come from a variety of sources. They're not necessarily bad, but they're not the sort of authoritative sources for almost any of this stuff. They're presented without source info. You have to dig for it. There are some mistakes, a couple of real big ones. If you put all this together, if I were to show another ecologist this, right, it would not be compelling. I'll just put it bluntly. And the reason I think is that you just can't curate ecological data like this. It's too messy. It's too different. Every single database itself is a large, messy curation problem on its own. Each one is run by teams of specialists to wrangle those data. Nobody should really be doing that job other than them. So what can we do? The solution, let the organizations do the curating and provide access to their data, identified first by source. And this isn't a new idea because in the Wolfram function repository are examples of doing exactly this already. A couple is written by my friend Joffrey, who works for Wolfram. iNaturalist search and GBIF search. I'm not going to run all these live, but if you ask how many records are in GBIF, the answer is over 2 billion records, and it changes every day. Okay, let them curate that. We don't need to curate that. All right. So what about this question? What about species in the Grand Canyon? So we can, through this interface that was developed, use the entity framework by having GeoBounds Grand Canyon National Park. So we can query, the GBIF using the Wolfram kind of entity framework. And we find that there's almost 400,000 records alone from the Grand Canyon. Okay, so what species are in that? Now, there's an excellent talk yesterday by Carlos Munoz, who's probably watching, hi Carlos, about how to unpack Darwin Core data file that GBIF returns if you go to their website and you request it. And that if we did that, we would get 386,000 records. But to be really Wolfram-like, we should be able to grab the data directly, which we can. But if you do that, you find that the API only lets you get 300. And so we'd have to do it repeatedly over 1,000 times to get all the records just for the Grand Canyon, which is kind of a pain. But I'll note that even in those 300 records, there are 76 unique species, okay, which is more than the previous query returned, just in 300 out of 300,000 records. If we use the iNaturalist function and we get that, you can only get 200 records at a time from iNaturalist. But in that, there are 86 unique species already. So the way to go for ecological data, it has to be source first, right? That's the only way that people will trust it. You need to be able to pull data from known and trusted sources. All the issues with data curation and all that get transferred to the provider. So Wolfram doesn't have to own any of those mistakes. It's just we provide access to these databases. All right. So instead of curating the data, they should be curating the access to the data via, let's say, an agreement with the provider. Maybe we need to pay for data in order to get more than 300 records at a time. Perhaps Wolfram credit could pass through somehow. a customized API via data connection. Yesterday, I saw Piotr Vendikir's talk about import-export functionality, and at the end, in terms of new things, he talked about new kinds of data connection, and he talked about getting more into APIs for acquiring data. So it sounds like that under development right now, which is great. There's not going to be one authoritative source of any data types. You should be able to choose which one you're going to use, and this is totally fine. And you can do clever things with the incoming data to make it more computable. So, for example, for these GBIF and iNaturalist things, each source download could result in a custom object that can be queried using standard nomenclature, right? Something called a species occurrence object, where you could make these kinds of queries of it and get standardized outputs. And again, Carlos showed how to do this in his talk yesterday. It just needs to be all bundled up into a function. Taxonomy. There's a thing called the Integrated Taxonomic Information System run by the US government. It's world complete. So if you want to know the taxonomy of a species, you should just query ITIS, and here it comes. Okay, authoritative and correct. And maybe you could get a whole tree. You could ask for all the carnivores, and that could return as a tree, but from the ITIS data set. If you could, this kind of easy access to known data sources, this would get ecologists excited. I mean, it really would, right? They would start to pay attention. So that's kind of why I'm suggesting it there. Sorry, let me just go back to the next slide. The next thing, you need to show some real killer applications, things that will get people to get excited, right? Startup 101 is that a successful product meets a need, right? So you need to show that Wolfram can do something that other things can't do using their sort of, their tech stack, right? The key strength is the breadth and consistency of the Wolfram language, right? A lot of times in ecology, to do something, we have to use 5 different softwares, and you're constantly transferring data and transforming data from one type to another to put it into a software, and then that makes an output, and you have to transform that and put it into another software to make a map. It can be a huge pain. Wolfram language can do all these things itself, and so it makes that go away. So I'm going to talk about one example here, maximum entropy modeling for estimating species range distributions. It started as an ugly-looking Windows app. It's now an R package. You download environmental array data from one or more websites. You acquire species observation locations, such as from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. You fit the model in R or the Windows app, and then you map the results. And for this to look good, you need another software package like ArcGIS or something like that. But here's what it could look like in the Wolfram language. This one line of code. An imaginary function, estimated species range. You give it a species name, and you ask for the range map. And this is what comes back. In this shortest version, both the environmental and location data would be downloaded from the default sources. Default parameters would be used. And of course, there'd be lots of ways to customize it using different options, right? And different things that you could ask for in the output, such as a parameter table, all the standard statistical outputs that come from this fit. But just showing this, if you could show this, it would blow people's minds, right? It really would. And it's totally doable in the Wolfram language. Couple of other examples, landscape connectivity. Imagine a function called linkage map. One array goes in, another array comes out, and you plot that on the landscape, and you have this. It's based on algorithms that are used for measuring circuit flow in circuits. And again, it requires you to download a couple of different other pieces of software to make it work. But it could all be done in-house. Population viability analysis, very, very simple, used in conservation biology all the time. Phylogenetic generalized linear model fit. Okay, we could get into evolutionary biology as well. So you got to push breadth, consistency, documentation, and support. The nice thing is a lot of things can be standardized in the way so that there's a lot of reuse of code. Right, a common data object in ecology is something called community matrix. It's the input for lots of different kinds of computation. Documentation would cite sources and use examples from the sources to demonstrate that it does exactly what the original algorithm was intended to do. And you could stress the advantages of commercial products, continuous maintenance, regular updates, consistent design and documentation, integration, all the things that the free packages don't have. Finally, I want to talk about the need for community partnerships. To do all of this stuff, Wolfram needs a closer relationship with community insiders. practicing professional academic ecologists. I guess like me, I'm probably the only one that uses the language, right? But um, you need to see how these abilities look from within the community. What is needed, what looks good, and what looks bad. Wolfram needs eyes on those demos to make sure that there's nothing there that's going to make people go, "Huh, I'm not sure what that's all about." To liaise with the authors of techniques and providers of data. And I think that for these application areas where there's really not yet an existing user base, you can't rely on volunteers. And this is a bit of a personal perspective because I've been asked to write some functions for the function repository, and to put together, a package of ecological functions, sort of on my own time. And the problem is that I'm an academic researcher, and the main thing that I need to do is write papers because that's what is the currency of success in my field. Good tool development takes time. I have hundreds and hundreds of ecological functions, probably 80% of a good ecological package sitting around my computer. I know how they all work. None of them are documented with documentation. That just takes a lot of time. I'd love to do it, but it's hard to justify it. And also, I need help occasionally. So I'm a scientist, but I'm not a computer scientist. I sometimes need help with optimizing algorithms and things like that. So I have a couple of suggestions. The first one is, I think there should be something called a Wolfram Fellow or some other name, right? Which is a closer relationship between established practitioners, right? Especially for new application areas and with Wolfram themselves. Well, we are involved in discussions about tools used in that field. We can suggest new functions. We can help build them. We can partner in discussions with data providers and provide that sort of inside community connection that Wolfram will need in order to sort of build these relationships. And, someone developing functions or a package, right, ought to be able to receive a higher level of development help from Wolfram experts. I know that I can do 80% of a function, and the last bit I get stuck on takes a programmer in that field something like 15 minutes to completely show me how to optimize it. I've seen it happen multiple times. That extra push is just super helpful, and a lot more would get done if it was available. And it would be something to put on a CV. I'm sort of joking, but not really. Last part, proposal 2, spend a little bit of money. You could provide some salary or teaching release, send fellows to meetings as presenters or exhibitors, provide some honorarium funds to allow us to take the time of a tool developer to walk us through it. You could host or sponsor workshops to break into new application areas. I spent 2 years at the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, which is at UCSB, because it was based on the Institute for Theoretical Physics, which is also at UCSB. And they would host workshops in which people developing tools at the cutting edge would come together and turn their developments into a package that anyone could use over a period of just a few days. And it was super good, and a really good way to spend a little bit of money. So here's a summary of my recommendations. Seek data access partnerships instead of trying to curate data, at least in ecology. Collaborate more closely. Help us to help you. Promote full-stack applications that take advantage of the breadth and integration, and make tools available to practicing ecologists worldwide. I'm going to end with this thought experiment, okay? Better than even the MaxEnt example. Imagine a local conservation team mapping the distribution of a newly discovered rare species. Let's say a new protea species in the Cape Floristic province in South Africa. There's a custom Wolfram language form they access on their smartphone for recording locations. Each new location goes to a data bin and triggers MaxEnt to run, producing a new estimated distribution map. That map comes back to the phone. That tells you where you're likely to find that species. So you go to the next place with a high predictive probability and record whether or not that species was there. And you repeat. And what will happen is the distribution map will be iteratively refined. The search process gets increasingly precise, and the overall distribution of that new species will be mapped in the shortest possible time. At the end, you get a nicely formatted report delivered, and the Darwin Core archive gets uploaded to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. All in the Wolfram language, from the cloud interface to the algorithm to the mapping to the report generation, and accessible to people in the field. That would be totally amazing. Thanks for listening. I'm going to skip back and be happy to answer any questions. Then open the Q&A. Let's see here. There's a couple of things. Ben asks, have you looked into creating your own entity stores, perhaps built from the API calls you demonstrated? Um, I haven't. It sounds cool. That's a little bit beyond my. I'm not. The entity framework is still something that I don't develop in it, so I don't 100% know how it works. It sounds cool, but I would need to talk to somebody about that. But I think this is what you're saying. I think is that when you download these data, which typically arrive either as something like a JSON or they come as a CSV table, but those can then be passed into some kind of entity framework, and then you can sort of query that sort of after the fact. I think that's a good idea, as long as the data come originally from these known and trusted sources. Does your field have a means of verifying profession-specific algorithms and computers also being validated by subject experts? I think so. I'm not a programmer. I'm guessing you mean things like verifying randomization algorithms and other kinds of sort of lower level functions where there are sort of known tools for verification. There aren't really. The way to do it in ecology, I think, is just almost every technique has a published paper that has an example data set and then shows the output. And the way to do it is just to make sure that your algorithm, given the same input data, produces the exact same output, right? And then have that citation, right? And in the documentation, and have those example data in the documentation. I don't think it's quite as integrated as it is for some of the lower level type functions. But it's a good idea, and it is important that these things sort of be validated. In your conversation with other ecologists who use the Wolfram language, I don't know any other ecologists who use the Wolfram language. There were a few. So at the meeting that was organized earlier, by Phileas Desigeist, who works for Wolfram, there was some other ecologists there. It was called, Wolfram Ecology or something like that. But almost all of them were just doing things like PDEs. Their notebooks typically didn't even have any text cells. It was just code. It was just ND-solve, things like that. So I don't really know. And I don't know how well it would go. This is why I mentioned the fact that for someone like me, I would love to develop an ecology toolbox, and I would love to go demonstrate it to my colleagues. Will they take it up? I can't say for sure. So it would be a labor of love on my part, which is kind of why I'm suggesting that Wolfram can throw a few incentives to people like me to take that initial step and see if we can get the ball rolling. Have you found a way to see all the data for your field in one place? No, it's all over the place. So this is why, it would be great if it wasn't just me. I have a sense of what data are used, by ecologists and what is considered reliable. I know where we get taxonomic information from. It's not one place, but it's a few places. I know where, species location data are stored. I know where movement tracks are stored. I know, I have friends who work for the IUCN. I know some of these things, right? And I would ask other people, or I would ask colleagues in other areas, what's the most important data source for you? That's a process that needs to be done to make sure that these offerings are kind of compelling, right? So it would be a question of talking to colleagues and doing those kinds of things. I'd love to be at the Ecological Society of America meeting and have a booth and just have people come over and say, what can we do? What can we do for you, right? To help to your research? What data do you need? What algorithms do you use the most? A question is raised, how about within Wolfram ontologies? I am sorry, Maureen. That's too far outside my expertise as an ecologist. I'm not entirely sure what that question means. Feel free to clarify it. I'm assuming that's something to do with the entity framework and the way that that's organized. If I can't answer your question, feel free to contact me outside of the meeting, and we can have a discussion about that. That seems like I'm just gonna look at the chat. Okay, well, it's nice to see that there are some people in other what I'm going to call the messy science fields someone said physician, scientist. Medicine is one of those messy science fields. Um, where I think what I'm suggesting will probably apply to people working in data in, I don't, is that psychology and medicine, where it's always going to be like this. The data are going to be difficult to curate in the same kind of way, and I think we need to take a slightly different approach to it. Okay. So that's it for questions, at least questions that I can answer. Effectively, I'll be in and out of some of the other meetings, so I hope to see some of you there and chat to you guys later. You can always message me in the app. Other than that, thanks everyone for coming to listen, and I now have to go and teach a class. But I'll be back later. Thanks.